Good evening. I'm Georgette Knoll with the League of Women Voters of the Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area, and this is going to be a community conversation, a follow-up to a presentation that the Sheriff's Department and the school district did in May. The presentation at that point was at Coon Rapids, and many of our members went. And the League isn't new to this topic. We've done a national study, or a national concurrence on a New Jersey study, so we do have a position on sex trafficking. And we've also done statewide programming. We, in fact, in January, we put out a newsletter that was entirely devoted to the topic of human trafficking in Minnesota. After the presentation in Coon Rapids, it occurred to us that we need to do some follow-up. There's some questions we have. What the League does when they have a position, and we don't do anything without studying a topic first, but what the League does when we have a position is then use it to advocate and to help make change in our community. And that's where we're at tonight, is we have some questions, and we hope to be able to find enough information that we can move forward, and we want to be able to direct our energy in a real positive way. So, my first question, and this is for the sheriff, and I'm sorry I forgot to do introductions, but there's a whole group of people here, but we have Karrie Schaaf with the Anoka Hennepin School District, Sheriff James Stewart with the Sheriff's Department, and Donna McDonald, who is the Violence Prevention Coordinator for Anoka County, who are going to help us with some of the answers to our questions. And my first question is, why Anoka and why now?
Why Anoka? Why now for us to be getting the word out?
Correct.
I can tell you that even after a couple of decades in law enforcement, and I kind of grew up working the street. I was a patrol deputy sergeant, moved up through the ranks in a variety of different divisions and roles. And even after that background, I can tell you I was naive to the problem being alive and well right here in Anoka County. And it wasn't until I became sheriff, I was fortunate to have a brutally honest detective ask for a couple of minutes of my time. And he came in and said, "Sheriff, can I close your door?" Absolutely. And he proceeded to talk to me about human trafficking, about sex trafficking in Anoka County. And I can tell you that the way he packaged it to me, as I'm sure it was his goal, it left me with my mouth agape. And I was shocked that this was going on. And not being one to jump in too naively to anything, or to not being wanting to have my eyes open, I said, "Show me what you're talking about." And within literally minutes, he had an absolute believer from me, because his specialty was internet crimes against children. His full-time job is sexual assaults, human trafficking, as it would come up, although at the time was seldom referred to as that. And that was kind of his forte, if you will. His specialty was sex crimes. And so here's a gentleman who knew exactly what he was talking about, and he was committed to making a difference. And as I've known him over the course of his career, I've always known him to be a person who cared about making a difference. I mean, he genuinely cares about all of his victims, which really made it even more credible for me to listen to him. And so as he began to explain to me, this is not just a global problem, but this is a problem in the U.S., this is a problem in Minnesota, and this is an alive and well problem right here in Anoka County. And again, he then put his money where his mouth is by proving to me the issue was here. And so I began my own research, if you will. Like you, I don't want to make an uneducated leap. And I began attending some training sessions. I began looking at a bunch of information online, made some new friends along the way, and really had my eyes open to just how prevalent it is right here and right underneath our noses. And flagrantly, there's multiple websites out there where we know hundreds of girls are being marketed, ridiculous numbers of times every day, right here. And it's still easy for us to try and dismiss it as, well, it must be a Minneapolis issue. Well, it's not, because we know that the organized task forces, of which we're a member of both Minneapolis and the Jerry Vick side in St. Paul, but the traffickers know full well the focused enforcement groups are in the metropolitan areas. And now that we don't have to, in this day and age, we don't have to force our victims to walk a certain street corner, to walk a certain block. It's all done on the internet. It can be anywhere. So where's it going to be? In your first ring suburbs, in your second ring, in that entire arena. And so that's exactly what we're seeing as the problem, is they're on the internet, and they're alive and well, and they're marketing our children and young adults who are caught up in this mess that they can't get out of. And so why here, why now? Because your sheriff had his eyes opened by one of our detectives who cared enough to invest the time.
I think about a year ago we visited Hope for Youth. And could you explain a little bit about how that organization has become involved with this situation, or with the topic? Yeah.
Yep. So Karrie Schaaf, homeless liaison for Anoka, Hennepin, and I haven't finalized my numbers yet, but I'm just over 900 for the school year that we're just wrapping up. And at the mayor forum, I said 888, but I was still wrapping up paperwork. I'm not loud enough? That's unusual for me. Wow, I must be tired. So we're just over 900 for this past school year, and 204 of them are unaccompanied youth, so young people without a parent or guardian. And in my work all these years, it's really been a struggle because I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with these families and these unaccompanied youth, but there's been nowhere for them to go. So it's always been on my heart and my vision to open a homeless youth shelter, a drop-in center in our community, so our kids can stay in our community, stay in their schools, continue to be with their friends, and remain in their own community where they know, instead of having to go to Minneapolis or St. Paul to find a shelter bed, which those are often full also. So talked to people about the problem for years and years and years, and one day I got a phone call the end of 2012, and someone had read an article in the newspaper about November's Homeless Awareness Month, and he said, oh, I can't believe these numbers, is this true? And I said, absolutely, and those are who we can identify, so we know the numbers are even higher. So he said, I think we should have coffee. And I said, well, okay, let's make time and do that. So I thought it was going to be 3 of us. Ended up being 25 people at our first meeting. And we ended up meeting every Tuesday after that meeting in the fall of 2012. And March 4th of 2013, the doors opened. So just a few short months. How it happened, whatever you believe in, it was a miracle for it to come together that fast. So Hope for Youth opened the doors. First of its kind homeless youth drop-in center in Anoka County. And we're averaging 30, 35 kids a day coming in for anything from a shower to washing clothes, accessing the food shelf. The most important thing is there's safe adults. So it's a place for them to go. So we talk about these trafficked youth in our community. It's not just youth who are experiencing homelessness, it's any youth is at risk. But these young people who have nowhere to go, who don't have that safety net, are the most vulnerable. So they're looking for a place to go. At the forum that I was at last week, someone had mentioned that couch surfing is not necessarily a form of homelessness, and it was really hard for me to stay quiet and sit in the audience and listen, because I wanted to explain, you know, having to couch surf, having to sleep on someone's couch, having to exchange sex for a place to stay, that's homelessness and that's exploitation. So we have young people who are having to exchange sex just for a couch, just for a bed. So sex trafficking and sexual exploitation just doesn't look like someone being kidnapped and put into a trunk and driven off to some other city. It happens right here in exchange for a place to sleep, because there is not an overnight shelter for our young people yet in our community. Hope for Youth is working on that, and my heart tells me within the next year we potentially could have overnight shelter, so there will be a safe place for them to go overnight. Right now we do have the drop-in center, which is open Monday through Friday from 2 to 7, and then on the weekends from 1 to 4. So we are there 7 days a week. We have paid staff now, and then we have amazing volunteers that come in to mentor, to connect, and to really give hope. And that's kind of where the name came from, but to give hope to these young people and to find safe options so that they don't have to be on the streets or put themselves at risk of exploitation. That was a really long answer, wasn't it? Sorry.
Sometimes it takes a long answer. If anyone has a question, raise your hand and we'll pass the mic around. But the next question I have, and it came up several times at the presentation at the Coon Rapids High School, and that was the lack of resources. Could you explain resources? Well,
I'm kind of glad you brought that up. I brought a variety of resource materials that we might available for everyone, and at a glance, if you see this brochure on the back, is a list of resources that are available. But primarily, there are a lot of resources available for us to learn more about, and you do a quick search online, you'll find more than you care to ever know, and a harsh look at reality. But I've brought a variety of different brochures, some that were from the forum and some that I've obtained since then, and just again, some good information for us to have as we move forward in this partnership to try and keep reaching people and making a difference. Some of the other things I think are of note is as we started this kind of more assertive approach to try and get the word out there a couple of years ago, one of our goals was to make some legislative changes and to reach out to our lawmakers. And I can say, in addition to some changes in the laws to protect our victims, we've also been able to see some funding for the advocacy programs. And so the legislators are listening, and I thank you very much for not only having us here tonight, but for your involvement and you're taking the time to be educated and to make some positive influences in our communities, because they're listening. And from my standpoint, the services, the advocacy services, have improved a lot. I know they're building another shelter for sexual trafficking victims in St. Paul, which was virtually non-existent in the past. So that's a huge victory and a step in the right direction for this entity. Related to the resources, I'm just going to spend a couple of seconds on my soapbox, because as we have improved support within our advocacy groups, and certainly a passion to make a difference, the one thing we're lacking are the detectives. And it's difficult for us to be able to, number one, infiltrate this arena, go after the traffickers, and to be able to help these kids or victims get their lives back. And I only say that because I'm going to give you one quick example. We had a case this past year in which our detectives identified a human trafficking case. Real long story short, 2 detectives working full-time plus for about 10 months on this one case. Now, there was 2 traffickers who had destroyed the lives of about 40 young girls. And in keeping with the norm, they moved across multiple states. They'd be in North Dakota one day, over here the next day, southern Anoka County. Then they'd head to whether it was Vegas or Iowa. And all those multiple state lines oftentimes also include throwaway phones, prepaid credit cards, all of the things that make it very difficult for us to track them, and that's why they do it. So through hundreds of administrative subpoenas, a lot of legwork, and detectives who are willing to donate a lot of their own time traveling across the states and gathering this information, I'm happy to say they got federal indictments on both of these traffickers and started working very aggressively with our resource partners to help these victims get their lives back. That's one example, but in the meantime, those detectives, Anoka County is a little bit unique in that our criminal investigative division, who handles these type of cases, we handle all major crimes for every community in Anoka County, whether you have a police department or not. And so all of the rapes, robberies, homicides, felony assaults come to the sheriff's office. So the same detectives, in some cases, who act in support roles for the human trafficking, these are the detectives with 30, 35 other cases on their desk. Now, that if it was 35 damaged to mailbox reports, that would be one thing, but they are only major criminal cases that they deal with. Well, how do you tell the felony assault suspect they're not a priority, we have to put you on hold for 10 months, as an example? It's not acceptable, and I'm not willing to do that. And so we're trying very hard to find that balance, but this was one of the calls, that case I just referred to, was one that we got a tip on. Well, I told you earlier about our detective who can find it. He knows what's going on, and all he's got to do is go online to find this stuff. But we don't have the resources to be proactive. I mean, if I could have if I could have 10 detectives, I'd love to, that can just go online, identify them, set up the stings, and start arresting these traffickers and sending them away for a very long time. I would call that justice. However, in this day and age, most of what we're doing, sadly, is reactive, based on tips. And that's why we tell everybody, if you see something, say something. If it doesn't feel right, there's a reason, call us. We want to know about these things so we can start the investigation. But there's definitely an interesting and very challenging balancing act due to the limited law enforcement resources. And once again, I know that was a longer answer than you probably needed. But
Could you explain a little bit more about the legislation that has helped and what more legislation you might need?
Well, some of it was they created what we call the safe harbor law, And the new safe harbor laws are allowing, and anybody can expand on this if I miss a part of it, but it basically allows the victims to stop being victimized and to not be treated as the criminals. And I'll give you an example. We look back 35 years ago, and forever since then, or prior to that, law enforcement would set up the sting operations, and they'd go out and they'd arrest the Johns, and they'd arrest the prostitutes, and they'd arrest all these people, and they'd call it a good day, and they'd write the reports, and that was a done deal. Well, over time, and fortunately in recent years, thanks to people like Detective Straczynski, who was the detective I talked to earlier, or about earlier, we've quickly realized that, when you're even at 18 into your early 20s, or any of these victims, at some point in time, they were pulled into this lifestyle against their will. I shouldn't give a percentage, but the vast majority of the time. And now you bring it down even lower. The average age of the girls being pulled into this are 11 to 14. I would argue that they do not have the cognitive ability to make a conscious decision about this type of dramatic negative lifestyle change. And we know they're being victimized. We know that they're caught up in this lifestyle against their will. And so as these victims get a little older, I mean, obviously I would hope even 40 years ago law enforcement would say, well, this is clearly a victim. But as they started getting into 17, 18, 19, up to 30, whatever, they would issue them a citation or arrest them along with the Johns and call it a victimless crime. Well, nowadays we're able to recognize this isn't a victimless crime. There are people's lives being destroyed, and by the hundreds every single day, numerous times every day. And so this law really allows us to be able to, I shouldn't say allows us, encourages law enforcement to see things the way Anoka County has been trying to see it for a while, in that there are victims here. Not everybody's a criminal, and we need to do what we can do to help the victims get their lives back by not giving them a criminal record, by giving them the proper advocacy direction, and helping them really get back on path. So that's kind of the nickel tour of the legislative side of it, or of the safe harbor law. But the other thing the legislation has done was to approve funding for some of the advocacy elements over this past year. And so that's where some of the funding, I'm sure, for the St. Paul shelter and some of the other advocacy components that you'll see in some of the brochures and the information to allow them to get additional grant funding and support that way.
Has there been any grant money for Anoka County so far?
Sorry for that. I don't think so. I think some of the funding that was out there, it was available for people to apply for, but we don't have a shelter. So there are some area shelters that applied so that they could allow 1 or 2 of their youth shelter beds to be available for a young person that had been trafficked or exploited. But we don't have a youth shelter in Anoka County. So I looked at the one to apply, maybe in partnership with the sheriff or the school district or Hope for Youth, but without us having a shelter, the dollars weren't that much. So you couldn't start a program with it. It would have to be something that could supplement another program that was up and running. And it didn't work for Hope for Youth because we didn't have overnight shelter beds. So there was some money, but it just didn't work for our community.
Some of the concerns that we've heard reading some of the other reports is the consequences for the traffickers and for the buyers, for the Johns. Could you talk a little bit about whether or not has there been any legislation to increase consequences?
There has been discussion. I'm not aware of any legislation. I will say on the trafficker side, the laws appear to be adequate, and especially because they're moving oftentimes juveniles across state lines, we're able to go federal indictments. In that case I referenced earlier, we did get federal indictments on both of the traffickers. The one was looking potentially at life, and the other one was looking at least 40 years. So I think the trafficker side is adequate, although the John side of it is where we need to focus and increase penalties.
Considering that they are children that we have been talking about, why aren't they charged with rape?
Excellent question. I think it's an interesting balance of a cooperative victim, and I think each case is unique. I'm sure there has been some cases where whether it goes to assault, whether it's criminal sexual conduct, or the engaging in solicitation of a minor, engaging in prostitution. There's a variety of different potential, and each case is a little bit different. Unfortunately, with most John operations or John stings, it's usually the law enforcement posing as the I won't say trafficker, because in that case they're trying to lure them in as prostitutes. So it's usually law enforcement. So when they come in, they haven't committed the act. And on the flip side, like the case I keep referring to, we're not catching them in the act. It's a paper trail we're chasing constantly, trying to catch up to it. Otherwise, they certainly could be facing much more egregious charges.
One of the things that Chief Brad Weiss brought up in his presentation was the cost of prosecution. Could you talk a little bit about that?
As with anything, there's a cost. I can't necessarily speak to the prosecution. I know the same thing I was talking with resources, though the cost for prosecution, the cost for investigation on the front end, how can you put a price tag on these two detectives' 10-month worth of their time? Well, I can tell you a dollar amount, I don't know it offhand, but we could calculate it, and it's going to be really expensive for this one case. But for those 40 girls who got their lives back, I'd say that's priceless. And so there's a real interesting dynamic, and it's hard to find that balance. The cost for prosecution, likewise, they're going to have a team of prosecutors reviewing the documents and reviewing our case reports that we submit. That case, again, I'll refer to it, the 10-month investigation. Coincidentally, the final report had over 10 gigabyte of data submitted as part of the case file. So as now you picture on the backside, the prosecutors, somebody has to sort through all of that data that we have compiled over the last 10 months, and they have to develop what are the charges, what is the case, and how to effectively prosecute it. And so I have no doubt it takes a lot of staff hours on their side to put together an effective case too. But as far as specific amounts, I probably couldn't speak to that very effectively right now.
Not get on the soapbox, but that's where it comes to being proactive rather than reactive, and we have to have more officers, more detectives, more people getting out there and finding it before it turns into this huge 10-month, 9-month, whatever long thing, and do more around prevention. Think about the money that we would save. So if we could work on family reunification, on affordable housing, on situations where these young people aren't as vulnerable, they're not out on the streets, and having services where we can intervene and having more detectives and officers that are working, then I think it would save us dollars. And you think about the lives, and there is no value or price tag to say, oh, this isn't worth it or that's worth it if we can save young people.
Another thing that came up in several of the reports, and again at the presentations that everyone has been doing, was the lack of a centralized database. Could you talk about how that would help? I think that would, all three of you from the county would probably understand the impact of having a database.
Oh, go ahead. Your mic.
Oh, I'm Mike. I'm Donna McDonald, and I'm with the Anoka County Community Health Department. And obviously in community health, what we do is try to look at why a problem is happening. And one of the best ways to do that is to get a sense of the scope of the problem. And what you just said is one of the really difficult things to do with this particular issue. I think every piece that I've read about this talks about how it's so very difficult to define how many girls are being affected by this. At the same time, we get good pictures from people who are providing services, from people in law enforcement, of the intensity of the issue and the fact that this is really happening to a lot of girls all over Minnesota. So as much as we'd like to, in community health, what we'd like to do is see what's causing the problem. And unfortunately, we don't have an inoculation for violence. I wish we did. But
work on that.
Yeah, I will be. I'll do that in my spare time. But I think that understanding the scope of the problem is one piece, and understanding where the problem may come from. A number of these young people may have had violence in their own homes, and that might be why they are on the street. A number of these young women may have been sexually or physically abused within their own homes. And so understanding sometimes the cause of this as well as the numbers that are out there is really important. And I think one of the things, I mean, I was sort of like Jim was, I knew about it, and we have a Sexual and Domestic Violence Coalition of Anoka County. And I have to be honest, we had trafficking on our agenda for about 3 months. And we kept saying, well, we just don't know enough about this yet. And so we would keep tabling it till the next meeting. And I think that's where we've all been kind of coming from, getting our arms around it. And our sheriff has done a very good job of doing the leadership for that. But the piece that I see a lot as I'm reading through this is that so many of the dynamics that are involved in these situations are very similar to what's involved with domestic violence and sexual violence. Aside from maybe the greed, that whole power and control issue, and how that so very much breaks down a person's ability to see themselves as anything but what that other person tells them they are. And I think one of the phases that they talk about in here is, breaking them down. And some of these young people come already broken. And so as we look at the scope, we also have to look at the reason behind.
Well, and to that point, if I can elaborate, I know I know Karrie has heard this story, but the control they have over these young girls typically is not just of taking advantage of their already being broken, but they convince them they're the only ones who actually care about them. And so, your family doesn't care about you, law enforcement's just going to arrest you, no point in talking to them. Matter of fact, eventually you better not talk to them is the way it changes. But early on, they're convinced that's their boyfriend. Exactly. And they often refer to them as their boyfriend. And just to give you a quick snapshot of the control they develop, we had one of our detectives got a phone call from one of our victims who was in an advocacy assistance program. It wasn't a shelter, but she was working with some folks. Anyway, she called the detective and said, "Can I talk with my boyfriend? He's in jail. We've locked him up. Why do you want to talk to him?" Heaven forbid, we're thinking, why would you want to talk to him? "Well, I want to go outside and have a cigarette with my girlfriend. I want to make sure it's okay with him." Now, if that doesn't give you a little snapshot of the control they have over these poor kids, not always kids, I use that term to probably a fault, but I mean, just to give you an idea of how they take advantage and how they truly develop that full scale of control.
Oh, pass that, sorry.
I was going to carry it over.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Your references have almost totally been female. I'm assuming that isn't just the case, but so maybe you want to go on with a little bit more about the fact that it's not all just young women?
You're correct. There are male victims. How do you be delicate? The commodity, if you will, they look at these victims. They don't look at them as people anymore. They treat them as a can of soup on the shelf, and the reality for them is the females are much more easily reusable multiple times a day, and in some cases 20 to 40 times a day. Now certainly the boys could be victimized as much. I don't know if that's a supply and demand, what the Johns are demanding or seeking, but the vast majority are female, and it's certainly we do have the male victims that come through, but I also think that another part of it is the males are much less willing to be identified and much more reluctant to be identified as a victim, and so even if we identify something, they're not going to embrace being assisted by law enforcement. And I might have missed some aspect of that.
That's exactly what they're not going to come forward.
Could you talk a little bit more about the difficulty of collecting the data? Donna talked about a little bit from her perspective. What would an adequate centralized database look like, and what's the challenge in collecting the data?
Yeah, some of the difficulties in collecting data on the law enforcement side, You know, unfortunately, Hollywood has done us no favors. Everyone is convinced that if I pick up the phone and call 911, you'll have all the evidence processed and the bad guys will be locked up in 59 minutes minus commercials. Then there's the real world. And again, Hollywood has not done us any favors because they've created a lot of misnomers. A big part of it is that we already have centralized data, that I can run one name into the database and I can tell you the last time you went on vacation, where you went, what you had for lunch, and that's just a ridiculous way that Hollywood has misled us. And I could go off on many, many examples, but I won't out of respect for your time. But one thing, we are trying to do a few different things, at least within our arena. Anoka County law enforcement community has always worked very closely together. Since 1974, we've had what we call the Joint Law Enforcement Council, and we are currently developing, and the first phases should start being implemented this fall in a new public safety data system. So we will have a truly integrated, not just a law enforcement data system, but it'll also have built-in crime analysis, crime tracking components. So that'll be a huge step for us within our county. And then I believe it's been 2 years already, but we partnered with all of the metro sheriffs, got together and had this very discussion. How can we work more effectively together to cross lines? We know the criminals, they don't care about a river, they don't care about a street, they don't care about a city border or a county border. Whoever's robbing somebody in Brooklyn Center is going to come up and rob somebody in Fridley, is going to rob somebody, and the list goes on. So what we've done is we partnered and created what we call the MRIC, or the Metro Regional Information Collaborative. And that is essentially the metropolitan sheriffs getting together and making sure that significant crimes, we are sharing each other's data to try and better stop the victimization of our citizens. And so it's a step in the right direction.
And it's as simple as me trying to run a runaway report on my young people that come in that may want to register for school. I'll run it in my community or the school that they're trying to enroll in, but it doesn't tell me that they're a runaway in another community.
Mm-hmm.
And we had that example at Coon Rapids High School. The young person was a runaway from Wisconsin, and it wasn't until we did the records request. So the police officer did the check, nothing came up, but when we did the records request, then that school then from Wisconsin called us to say, oh, do you know that we have a missing persons runaway report on this young person? So then we were able to connect the dots. But I went right to law enforcement to say, hey, can you double check? Something just isn't right with the situation. I don't know who she's staying with. And, they can come and enroll, and that's part of the McKinney-Vento, the law that protects them, is they can enroll, they don't have to have records. But when it is a minor, we always want to double check and make sure everything's in order. And we thought we had done that until we did records request, and they said that they had a missing persons report. So again, not having the system in place.
Well, and this collaborative effort, the sharing of information that we're all engaged in right now, is a step in the right direction too, because I'm fearful that the concept of eliminating all these independent silos of information and putting them into one pod where we can all benefit and share even basic information, that's going to be, my opinion only, a long ways off. Right now at the Capitol, I'd say there's many ways in which they're trying to move us the other direction. There's a lot of push against sharing issues related to data privacy and all these other things, and I get that, but again, some of it is counterintuitive, and I will acknowledge I have a bias as a law enforcement officer wanting to be able to catch bad guys. And our system's abused, we've seen that and we know that, and I think what we need to do is be comfortable in stepping out and hopefully law enforcement leaders like myself saying, if you've got a cop breaking the rules, punish them. I don't have any issue with that. And that's what we should be doing, and that's what we are doing. But having said that, I think it's too little too late, and in the meantime, with some of the data privacy things that are circulating out there, we have a lot of great people trying to accomplish the same things who can't share information because we're in violation if we do. And so there's a push to make that even more and more limited moving forward. And so it's like I joked about Hollywood before, talking about us all sharing information and trying to how effectively we can gather up a trail, and when in fact we're moving in the opposite direction. It's getting harder and harder for everyone, including law enforcement, to get any data.
And traffickers know that, and they're 10 steps ahead of everybody else, and they're taking advantages of those weaknesses that we have because we're not sharing data, and the fact that in our community especially, we don't have enough detectives and officers, so they know that and they're taking advantage of it.
I wonder too if some of the issue is it's unless somebody identifies, many of the people that are maybe seeing these through our traditional systems, unless that young person self-identifies as being in this situation, it may be hard for them to even know that they are. For example, our sexual assault nurse examiner program that we have, and I don't want to speak for them, but I know that they work closely with Alexandra House. And if someone comes in having some kind of a sexual assault, that they would hopefully have an advocate that would work with that person. But if you think of these women in this kind of situation, they're going to have someone there that doesn't really want them using that kind of service. So our traditional way of maybe collecting some of this data is stymied just because of, again, the power and control issues.
Thank you. I have two questions. Most of the references you make seem to allude that the traffickers are men. Are there women involved in this just as actively as the men? And my second question, I know we're hearing your message about the lack of resources. How much have you, I'm sure you've approached the county commissioners about more resources for increasing your staff and the things that you need to do this job. And what has their reaction been to giving you budgeting to do this?
In answer to your first part, the men versus women traffickers, yes, there are women engaged in it. They would be the minority representation. However, the men who are the traffickers will oftentimes still employ women, and that's what we try to, when we are out talking to the youth in our schools. It's not this scary, mean-looking, nasty guy who crawled out of an alley who's going to be trying to lure you into this trade. They oftentimes will use a 17-year-old girl who's already been working for them to go out and recruit other 17-year-old girls, because what better way to get them to lower their guard? And so there are oftentimes young girls engaged in this, not that they're not necessarily victims as well, but they're so caught up in the lifestyle that it's hard for them to necessarily discern right from wrong anymore. So, and there are some women who have been the traffickers, but again, it's just not as common. It's just the reality. And then,
Before you jump to
yes.
commissioners, because that'll be a longer one.
Hopefully not.
The young women that I've talked to that have been trafficked, it's ironic because they move up in the ranks, but they're called a bottom. So they're the ones that are doing the work. So they're out in the schools, they're at the community events, and they're doing the recruiting, and they are much more approachable, and you can establish that trust with a female. And I've worked with young ladies and talking to them, you were stuck in this for the last 9 months. Why do you want to bring more young girls and boys into this? Because you know how horrific this is and what this has done to your life. But for them, it's a way where they don't have to have the sex anymore. They don't have to be out there doing the work. If they can just go out and recruit girls, it's a lot easier on them. They forget about what's going to happen to those girls, but they're still under that control. It's complete control, and they're fearful for their life. And this one young girl, she had to keep doing it, and she's the one that actually had to physically assault and keep the girls in line when they try to leave or they try to make phone calls. And she didn't want to do that, but she knew if she didn't, then they would go after her siblings. So there was a lot of threats and intimidation, and then they're trying to protect their families, and it's horrible. So if we think about not having enough detectives, not having places for these young people to go, what they're enduring every single day is horrific. Horrific.
Absolutely. And then in response to your second question related to the commissioners, I can tell you I do have a good working relationship with the county board. They're well aware of it. Several of the commissioners have even attended some of the sessions that we've provided and or other training that I've attended. I saw at least one of our commissioners attend as well. And so they're aware. We live in some interesting times in which I guess I'll take a step back and give even more of the foundation. As the independent elected sheriff of the county, I have a distinct privilege of reporting to you. I report to the citizens. I don't report to the county board. However, they do set my budget. And I think we're all aware of the interesting financial dynamics we're in right now. And so the concept of going in and asking for enough staff to get the job done, I have done that in the past. I've asked for, and it's an interesting balance, and I understand there is a balance. There's a lot of departments within the county in addition to the two offices of county attorney and sheriff. And having said that, I did go in and ask for additional resources because sadly, and I'd be happy to go into much more detail at your convenience offline, but this is one of probably 6 large-scale initiatives that we're trying to make a difference in because I think it's my job. I was elected by the people to protect and serve and to care for the welfare of our citizens, and I take that very seriously. So this is an area in which we asked for a variety of resources to better provide services, and we did receive additional 2 bodies last year from the county board, not in this arena. And so what we got was 2, I'll just cut to the chase, we got 2 e-forensics, computer forensics, video forensics, cellular forensics, etc., detectives that were on our list of positions requested. And so the good news is by assigning those people, it will lighten the load of 2 other detectives, so now they'll only have 30 cases on their desk, and we'll be able to focus more on this. I'd love to have a team of dedicated detectives focused on this, but the reality is it takes a lot of resources, and it really is it's a decision. Our budget session is coming up. I do intend to explain to them some of the things that I would like to be pursuing, but ultimately knowing that they hold the purse strings, and whether it can happen or not is going to be up to them. Their counter to that, just so you're aware, would be that the sheriff controls his own budget, and I am probably be in trouble. The counter is the sheriff controls his budget. If this is a priority, I could assign 6 detectives to this tomorrow morning, and that's my decision as a policy maker. However, that means we're either taking cops off the street or we stop investigating other crimes, and so it really is. It's a balance. I appreciate their support and their partnership, but I also know that they're trying to balance a very complex and interesting budget. So I don't know how well that answered your question, but that's probably more than you wanted here.
I have a strange and perhaps naive reasoning, but have we looked into what is the background of these Johns? Why do these men want to do what they're doing?
It's an hour and a half conversation.
Well, as long as we have till midnight.
I mean, we know that, many of our young gals that are needy in one way or another, or homeless, or feeling unloved and such. But what's with the guys? What is prompting this?
I think, and this is just my opinion, I have not read a study on it, but based on what we've seen and heard, a lot of the Johns are former victims themselves, going back in time. Not that justifies their behavior by any stretch of the imagination. But they are also, we're in a society where you turn on TV any given night and you're going to see somebody either being slapped around, raped, abused. We've created a culture, and Donna's got an uphill battle, as do all of us in this room. I mean, Hollywood, again, has created a culture where that's just the way life is. And it's not, but that's what our kids are seeing. And in the meantime, you get your kids going online, they might be doing their homework and going to, I'm trying to remember what the one was, White House. Kids are they might be looking up the political history of our nation. White House whatever is a porn site. So there's pop-ups, and these kids are getting caught up. They almost can't, whether it's scantily clad trash on TV or violent, hardcore stuff that's popping up to them on the internet. That's the world that is being developed around us, and unfortunately, that's becoming normalized in our society.
There have been lots of research, in fact they don't even do it anymore, that showed that violence on TV did affect children, and I would extrapolate that very much like the sheriff is saying, is that same kind of violence. I mean, many of the video games we have now, you progress up through the channels by killing a prostitute or raping a woman, and there are this steady diet that our kids are getting, and kids are spending anywhere between 35 and 40 hours in front of screens, full-time job. And so that can't that can't help the situation.
And it's not just video games and music videos. Watch a burger commercial. Everything is sexualized, no matter what we watch. Toys, pads, I don't care what it is. Everything has some sexual connotation to it, so our kids are being exposed to it all over the place. Think about some of the most common Halloween costumes. Pimps and hoes. How many themed pimps and hoes parties have you seen? The big purple hat, the big bell-bottom pants. It's disgusting, and it's become normal. Our society has kind of accepted it. So that's part of it. I'm not giving you a scientific reason, but you watch TV, you listen to music, you think about what we think is normal in our society, and that's part of it.
We just worked on a course for coaches, and one of the pieces that we wanted to do in this coaching course, it's an e-line interactive course, is we wanted to have them kind of get a perspective of how our culture affects our kids. And so we put together a bedroom of a normal teenage boy and a normal teenage girl, and then they would click on something and would look at the cultural message that young teen might get, from their computer, from a magazine telling them how to dress, just a variety of things. And when we did our beta testing on it, that out of everything really impacted the coach. I never thought of it because it was just all these 5 or 6 things that they were seeing all at once. They said, I never thought about all these messages and how they accumulate to our young people.
Aren't there terrific health problems? I mean, I think venereal disease would be rampant.
I can't speak
So
to
there's
that.
an expert in the room, but yes, I would, yes, STIs, STDs.
STDs, Becky would probably know the answer to that.
So you should introduce yourself too.
Thank you. My name is Becky Fink. I'm the director of the Nucleus Clinic in Coon Rapids. I just had an opportunity to meet with staff from the Sheriff's Office today, particularly around some of the issues associated with trafficking, testing, sexually transmitted infections, the long-term consequences of infertility, pelvic inflammatory diseases, and a lot of the other concerns that we have around the health concerns for women that have been trafficked. That in addition to sexual coercion that we're seeing in a lot of young people. I was just trained as a trainer with Project Connect around sexual coercion with young people, and I am telling you, it takes your breath away, what has become a part of our culture. So absolutely, yes. And we're happy to be a part of the community, and hopefully we'll do everything we can to support the health care for people that are experiencing sexual violence. Thank you.
You said that there were 40 girls whose lives have been brought back after being trafficked. Will they fall back into a stage of vulnerability and go back to this?
It's certainly possible. That's one case. I mean, we know there are hundreds of girls caught up in this every day. The advocacy groups, getting them out of that lifestyle, away from those traffickers, is the first significant step. And then I think, again, looking back historically, they might have just been sent back home. Well, we know that's a flaw because they might have been abused, as we talked about before, in their home. Well, that's not going to benefit anybody. What are they going to do? They're going to run again. They're just going to get found by a different trafficker, etc. But getting them into the advocacy groups and getting them into a true support system is huge in getting them back on track. And I know we've got a couple of detectives who have given out that they routinely will give out their cell numbers as well. Detective Straczynski, again, I can't sing his praises enough. He had encouraged and just kept mentoring and encouraging this one girl I'm thinking of in my head. She went back and got her GED, and she told me flat out she did it because he kept seeing something in me I didn't see. And it's really about giving them hope, giving them a vision for a future that they didn't even know existed. And so when we take the time to invest in these kids and these victims, and not I say kids, but in these victims of all ages, once they understand they have worth as a human, and that there is hope and there's a tomorrow, and it doesn't matter what mistakes they've made or what other horrific things have been imposed on them, but we really help them understand tomorrow's a new day and I can put that behind me. It's really neat to see, in many cases, their eyes might light up for the very first time. I was talking with a young girl last week who, that was her first time she'd ever seen hope. And there's just not, that's why we're here.
Are there families involved in the counseling?
I can't speak to that directly. I know when they're if they have returned home, then typically, yes, they'll be a part of it. At least my understanding with the advocacies or advocates that I've spoke with.
I would say it's ongoing. So say we're lucky enough to have a detective that is able to arrest the trafficker, the Johns, and they're all gone. Well, guess what? She's going to be, or he's going to be right back out on the streets, caught up by someone else, unless we can empower them and rebuild that self-worth and self-esteem, because there's been many, many years that young person's been torn down. So it has to be ongoing. It can't be, we'll arrest them and now the problem's gone. There's another predator out there that will get their hands on them if we don't empower them. So Breaking Free is an outstanding organization, and there's a lot of survivors that work at Breaking Free. So they've walked that journey and they can walk alongside these young men and women through their journey. So it's ongoing. I wouldn't say arrest them and now the problems are gone. And sometimes families are involved and sometimes families are part of the problem. They may have been the one that got that child involved in trafficking.
And I did bring some Breaking Free materials over there as well.
I would just like to say one thing about, again, going down to the prevention end of the spectrum. Before Jim said, if you see something, say something. That can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum. We all have young people in our circle of influence. This isn't just those girls or those boys. These are people that are in our circle of influence. And just as Jim said, that detective made a difference for that young girl. I imagine Karrie's made a difference for someone with her work. If you can be that caring adult, way back here at the beginning when you're suspecting that just something isn't right with this kid, doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but if you could just start being that caring adult and then maybe hook them up with some resources, or if they don't want resources, just say, well, I'm here, I care about you, I want to talk, I want you to feel like you can come talk to me. That's a piece we all can do. And I think we all know when we get a little twinge in our gut when you're around a kid and you think, oh, something's just not quite right here. But if you can be that caring adult, that can be way here at the prevention end before they get to Karrie or before they get to Jim or Becky.
And that's a great point to maybe elaborate on is, you know, we talk about the runaways or the homeless and some of the other kids who have faced some really difficult times already, but the traffickers don't care. And so we like to think, you know, if anybody saw the last county newsletter, that was my focus because I've heard it so many times, but the 6 dangerous words, it will never happen to me. We live in suburbia America, and every time you know, you're talking to surviving family members or whatever the situation is, boy, I never thought that would happen to me. They want all of us to understand that that really can happen to anybody. And you know, when I talk about the 11 to 14-year-old girls that are out at the mall, it only takes the one guy standing in line to offer to buy them lunch and then meet me here next week. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'll tell you what, I'll buy you a new iPod. I'll buy you a new iPhone. How many 11-year-old girls aren't going to be glad to meet him next Saturday for an iPhone or an iPod? Again, going back to that cognitive recognition of this is a dirtbag and I need to avoid him. They just don't think that way. They're you know, they haven't fully developed mentally that way yet. So we need to do our part to also make sure we're educating the youth and help them understand this, again, isn't going to look like somebody who crawled out of an alley, but they're still going to hurt you.
Right, you were saying that adults needed to wake up and report issues that maybe set a red flag up in our heads, but is there a way where teenagers can go to someone in the school and report a suspicious going on as well?
Yes, so Donna, that was an excellent point to make sure we're thinking about prevention and empowering young people. And I am working with the associate superintendents and the school board to figure out how we're bringing this message to our students. After the forum, we got tons of feedback from the community that we need to be in and presenting to the students. This is a great message for the adults, for the community, but it's the front line. It's the young people who themselves might be trafficked, might be put in a precarious situation, or might know someone that is making some poor choices or risky behavior. So we're trying to figure out how can we present this information appropriately to our student body, and we do have social workers now within our schools, and the social workers are also my homeless leads who are connecting with those students and are very aware, especially of our unaccompanied youth, but it can be any youth, male or female, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, any young person could be trafficked or taken advantage of. So there are people within the schools, and we will be doing a lot more intentional training this year on sex trafficking and sexual exploitation with our staff.
And we've been working with the school district to try and develop that concept. But we also have trained our school resource officers and our school liaison officers who are also, routinely immersed in the schools to make sure that they know who is potentially being victimized, and working with the students and working with. The nice thing about having the school liaison officers in the schools for prolonged periods, they're not quite as always approachable as the teachers or some of the school staff, but it's always impresses me at how well they develop a rapport with the youth. And so it might that's part of this program, is to reach out to all those extra eyes and ears within the schools and say, tell somebody, you could be saving a life. And fortunately, unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet. Fortunately, it's going to be happening in the near future, and the liaison officers have had some interactions in some of our schools. So.
And we have to do these things, but once again, I'm going to sound preachy, and I don't want to join the whatever group, but this whole culture thing, we've known there was a there was a Mr. Rogers segment, and it was contrasted with at a daycare center with a violent video or a violent cartoon, and then they were showing the parents the difference in the same children in the effect of one versus the effect of the other. And I've also cut out an article some time ago that the people that create most of our televisions, frankly, their morals seem to not be on the same chart as the rest of us at all. And I'm wondering whether you work on advertisers or TV stations, or maybe this is something that to some extent in the long run we are going to have to try to have some effect on the culture. I mean, I used to get so upset with what's his name, 3.5 Men and such. When mother is buying prostitutes for the two sons at a program that is shown before 8:30 at night, what's going on here?
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's a big part of the problem we're seeing as a society, and that's why we collectively need to only go to hotels that don't sell pornography. We need to reach out to the advertisers, because let's be honest, there's two words that are killing every one of our youth: sex sells. Yeah. And why are they doing it? Because it works. And until collectively society is willing to draw some hard lines in the sand, and some of the examples, I get encouraged every time I hear about a family-oriented movie doing well at the box offices, because hopefully they'll pay attention. Let's do some more family-friendly, some more appropriate films and even TV series. But yeah, you're right. There's mostly garbage out there.
What you're talking about, Susan, I think was an experiment Dr. David Walsh did with preschoolers. And he has this whole presentation on the 3 things that really sell, and advertisers know it. So it's the advertisers, they're the ones that are paying to have these shows on there, but the 3 things that sell are sex, violence, and humor. And think of how many of our shows combine all 3 of those, and that's what sells. And the advertisers are supporting those things that include sex, violence, and humor more and more.
Well, puppies sell too.
Yes, they do.
Puppies sell too.
An apple pie.
Sheriff, if I could, we've had a couple of false starts with the sexual assault action team and some other, looking to the county board to pass a clean hotels resolution, and it just keeps getting stalled for a whole variety of reasons that I'm not sure. Would you be interested and willing to work with us so that we could get in the Clean Hotels Resolution is basically to say, and there are many other counties that have passed this as a board resolution, that we will not allow our public officials to spend public dollars in a hotel setting that promotes and makes available sexual violence or pornography in their rooms. It's called a Clean Hotels Resolution. It's not fancy thinking, it's not hard, but somehow we have not formally taken a position as a community, and I think it could raise a lot of awareness for a lot of families and individuals if elected officials could advance that. And I'd say I'm happy to work again on it. if we could, but I think that would be a really good start, because there's a lot of people that aren't aware of that as a screening before you do business. And there's so many hotels and entertainment venues that have signed on. So it's not, it's not fancy thinking, it's not anything that's out of the realm. But that, I think, coming probably from, a countywide elected official would be very helpful, if you don't mind me saying.
I think it's a great idea.
I'm not elected, but count me in.
I think it's a great idea. And I did neglect to mention earlier, too, as we were talking about the human trafficking, as we talk about hotels, it spurred the thought. But we also developed and prevented training for hotel owners, hotel management, hotel staff that we've offered a couple of different training sessions for now. Unfortunately, limited success in the turnouts, I'm sad to say, but we'll continue to reach out to them, too, because they're going to be our eyes and ears. We have homes that are being rented and apartments that are being rented for the sex trafficking, but a lot of it's occurring in our hotels. And more often than not, the staff are seeing what's going on, but they might just be oblivious. I'm just passing a Visa card, and I don't, haven't been trained to know what to look for or what to do if they do feel, icky about what's going on around them. And so we're trying to fill that gap as well.
And once again, what you can do is when you make your reservation to go on vacation and you call your hotel to make that reservation, ask them if they have pay-per-view pornography. And if they do, say, well, I would like you to let your manager know that I am not staying there because you do have that. If we get enough people, there was a national push for that last summer. If we get enough people doing that, we may see some results.
And there is a list. There's a list available of all the hotel chains that have signed on, so it's not a mystery. We can make that available.
Yeah, make sure you patronize the ones who are on the list.
Before we
Shame
talk
the ones
about
that aren't.
That's right.
Before we talk about what we can do, I have one more question, and I know it might take another whole hour, but just give me a quick answer. What would the role of a youth homeless shelter be, and what would it look like? We've heard at the last forum that you did, it came up with just about every single speaker. That's one thing that Anoka County needs and doesn't have. And I'm curious about where it would be, what it would look like, and what role would it have in the sex trafficking.
Well, I have floor plans already drawn up. I've had those for many years. So I can give you all those details later. But in a nutshell, it would be a one-stop shop, and it would be a safe place for young people to go. And it's not just, okay, you can sleep here tonight and then come sleep here tomorrow and then sleep here the next day. It's really getting into what it is that they need, meet them where they are, figure out what's going on, and help them reestablish, redevelop, build their life. So it's one-stop shop. There's your emergency shelter. It's a really high building, so it's got to be somewhere where we can build up, because then the next floor, it's okay, they can find employment, and then they can start paying rent. They have their own place. So we bring services and organizations in, whether it's county benefits, whether it's employment. We talked about having an automotive repair place so they can learn a skill, but then they can fix their cars. I have a whole list of exactly what it'll look like. But it's one-stop shop, bring all the community resources together. We have a clinic in there, and Becky and her team can do their magic right on site, and we have family mediation, and we have just all these amazing things, and it provides a safe place for them to go. And the big thing is there's preventative options there too, so maybe that young person hasn't ran away or that family hasn't kicked the student or youth out. They can come there to get some family counseling if they don't have insurance, and someone helps them figure that out. So it's a one-stop shop, and it then empowers that young person too, so that they don't feel like if they're approached at a bus stop or whatever, that they have to give in to what this man is saying, or let me buy you this. You know what, I've got my own job. I can buy my own iPod, thank you very much. And they go on about their business. But keeping them safe so they're not sleeping outside in 17 below zero weather, or having to exchange sex for a place to stay, because they know that they have a safe place, that their community cares about them, and they don't have to worry about where they're going to sleep. And then we help them along that journey, because some shelters are time limited, and we want a place that we can empower them and give them the life skills so that they can go out and sustain their own housing in their own place, whether it's in my one building or they find something elsewhere. And where it will be, well, that's secret right now. I have a location picked out, and I got a call today from someone else who had a really good answer at the mayoral forum. Him and I have been talking since his great answer, and he had a really great idea for me today too. So there is a community that has been a little more accepting than the other community that some of you know about. So we are working on something that's centrally located on the bus line and in a community that is ready to embrace our young people and give them a second chance.
You should give this some thought.
I should. I'll think about it later and get back to you.
How many beds does this wonderful place have?
Well, this wonderful place would have enough beds to meet the need that we have, but there are limitations with every city. So every city has their zoning and codes. So that's the big thing right now, is trying to figure out this community in which we are looking, what does their code look like? And there really isn't anything in place, and they're being phenomenal, not putting any moratoriums on anything, really having some great discussion with us to see what we can do. So for me, it would be that multi-level, because you might have a code that says this, okay, that's my emergency shelter on the first floor, but then I can have rental units on the next floor that can house my next set of youth, and they got some other funding because now we've got them employed. So eventually I'm going to work myself out of a job because we won't have any more homeless youth in our community. But for now, that's what I'm going to do.
I'd like to just ask a question, and this is for the sheriff and Karrie too. As I've looked at this, I mean, Minnesota is on the leading edge in terms of the law that we have now on the books, but my impression has been that there aren't a lot of other states that are doing this really well, or that we can learn from, that we are inventing the wheel here for this population. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, to a large degree, that's been my experience. I recently went to the National Sheriff's Conference, and I was kind of hoping to get more knowledge, more data to be able to bring back and keep raising our bar. And that's exactly what I found. Is a lot of our country is where we were, 5-6 years ago, and it's an interesting dynamic. But I just see that as an opportunity for us to bring the message to them, and that's what we did. I'm in a Professional Standards Committee, and I'm in the National Domestic Violence Committee. So we're starting.
Somewhat like we did with domestic violence in the 80s. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I am from Ethiopia. While I was there, I just got back the 17th of June. I met with one of my cousins. She's a young girl. There are these agencies that are set up in Ethiopia, all over Addis Ababa. What they do is they will recruit girls to go to Saudi Arabia and different Arab world to go work as babysitters, as housemates. But when they end up going there, it's not, housemaid jobs, cleaning, doing laundry and stuff. It's very much going out there at night and selling their bodies. So this cousin of mine went there. She's 18. And she was told she has to get out, and do this. And she said she can't do it, so they send her back within 2 weeks. As you working here, I know that sex trafficking is a huge problem in Africa. Is there are kids are involved within, Minnesota or Anoka County? And how is that working?
Well, they're being recruited, so ours looks a little different. I'll tell a personal story that I've never told, not even to you, Sheriff. So I graduated a long time ago in the 80s, and I went to Coon Rapids High School, so this is my community, and I was looking for a job, and in the shopper, I think it was, found this job posting that said, come on out to California, we'll make all your dreams come true, come sell some magazines. I thought, oh my God, I've never traveled, I can go to California, I can sell magazines. Well, guess what? I got on a Greyhound bus and I went to California because I grew up in a family that wasn't able to provide me college money to go on to college, and I wanted to be able to go to college. So I said, I'm going to go make money and I'm going to see another part of the world. And that's exactly what that was, is to come out, and they did have you sell magazines so that you could steal people's credit card numbers. So you're walking around, for 12, 14-hour days in the heat, and you're selling these magazines, so be careful if someone knocks on your door trying to sell you a magazine. So we would do that, and then what it was is building that relationship and that trust with you to get you to go on to this other business. And let me get your hair done for you, and let me do your nails. And quickly I realized what was going on, and I never did anything besides sell magazines, and I sold some to Rod Stewart once. I was really weird.
He can read?
I don't know if they stole his credit card number, though. I think it was Rolling Stone magazine or something. But so I realized what was happening, and I said, I need to go home. And they kept all of our money, so we didn't have our own money, and the commission we made, we didn't see any of that. And they had like 6 of us to a hotel room, and they kept us on a very tight leash. You had no day off, and I realized this was not a safe place. So I said, I need to go home, and I didn't have money. They have my money. Can you just get me a Greyhound ticket to go back home? And they said no. And so then I made up a lie. My mom was dying of cancer, whatever, like this thing. I got to go home and help plan her funeral. Well, what are you going to do? Dig the hole? Doesn't someone else do that? So they're like, no matter what I said, they wouldn't let me go. And finally, I talked my way out of it, and was able to sneak and use a phone and got a bus ticket at the Greyhound station, and they didn't drive me to the Greyhound, so the hotel shuttle drove you so far, and then I walked the rest of the way, and then I got home. But I did go out with a girl that I graduated with, and she stayed out there much longer than me, and she's now back and okay. But that's exactly what that was, is and here's me, I'm like, oh, I just want a new job, and I get to see another part of the world. Had I stayed and not been able to get out, or not been in tune to something's not right here, who knows what would have happened to me. And I know that was happening to the other young people, and this was in the 80s, a long time ago.
Do you guys give out trainings for minorities? Because I would really love to kind of take classes
around what we're doing in the community. Yes, we do forums and stuff like this, so I'd be glad to share my card, and I know Sheriff would too. Yeah, thank you for your question.
That brings up an interesting issue. This has been about sex trafficking in Anoka County, but is there labor trafficking as well?
It exists. What we're finding is there's organ trafficking and there's labor trafficking. We're finding that the labor trafficking is sometimes even more difficult, because if your average citizen sees what they suspect to be sex trafficking, they're going to call us, and we're grateful for that. But a lot of people see the labor trafficking, and they may just think, oh, there's migrant workers that are working on that farm or working whatever. And so they don't tend to call, and the people, the victims that are caught up in that, are not inclined to reach out to law enforcement, and so it's very difficult. And then to bring it to that next level, I'm not aware of any local, but I probably wouldn't be when we talk about the organ trafficking. Unfortunately, worldwide, that's a real problem too. But you talk about a very small, very tight-knit community that's very difficult to infiltrate, and that would be a part of that arena. So is it likely all occurring? Yes. The degree I couldn't begin to guess. We have a hard enough time trying to really identify the sex trafficking, but I see Becky, maybe she has some insight as to some of those arenas.
Excuse me, Sheriff, not to that point, but a question that I have, that uneasy feeling that you talk about when you've been around people and that's been your business for a long time, it's a little tuned up. What about salons and personal services? I mean, there's something about that, and it's a licensing issue from the Department of Health, but you're trying to find that person in the department. It's really it's an effort. Could you speak to that? Because that's something that's a part of a lot of people's lives, are those personal services and those nail salons and hair salons, and there's something about that that's just
absolutely
not right.
And the nail salons is the example I probably would say first and foremost. Our detectives have worked cases out of the nail salons, and oftentimes they're non-English speaking. What we tell people is the common signs you'd look for in any trafficking, the signs of the control, signs of if they're not able to go out on a break, and depending on how they're able to communicate, sometimes you get a report, sometimes you don't, but ask them some of those fundamental basics about where are you staying, who do you work for, does everybody work for the same person, and I realize that's a little bit different, but are the nails all you, and I'm struggling with the way to package this, but it really will become apparent pretty quick. Like you said, we have that extra sense built into us when we know something's not right. And if nothing else, we're always happy to entertain a phone call if it seems suspicious, and we can send in the experts. And I sit before you tonight very humbled at the opportunity to be here, but I got to tell you, I'm not an expert. Our detectives are the experts. I'm just merely their mouthpiece and trying to get the word out there as best we can. But that's certainly, the nail salon's the perfect example that you brought up, because we know that's a commonplace.
Well, the three guys on the cell phone with their feet up on the thing, you know, while everybody else is working, is my, you know, not so sophisticated cue, but just something to be mindful of.
This has been a very interesting conversation, but could we spend the last few minutes talking about what it is that we could do? What do you expect from the community and from citizens and from organizations like ours?
From my perspective, it's a big part of why I try to bring resources when I go out and about. You'll see all of the list of the folks who are trying to get engaged, and they're trying to eliminate all those independent silos, and they're trying to combine us in a collaborative effort to help the victims, to get people their lives back. And so whether it's volunteering your time, your resources, financially supporting them, those are real important aspects. And we talked about Hope for Youth. The volunteering opportunities for mentors is key. Most of these organizations can't survive very effectively without people who care and are willing to give up some time and resources as mentors or as financial supporters or sponsorships. So I think that's a real big way. The other one is keep spreading the word. You know, I was sharing with a couple of folks earlier. For me, this is just another great opportunity. I spoke to a Rotary Club earlier today about human trafficking, and I went from there to the Imprisoned show at North Metro TV to do a presentation on human trafficking. And so if we can get everybody to just keep telling two friends and have them tell two friends, and when you see the forums come up, if you see a flyer, tell everyone you know. Don't just tell them, encourage them to go. I mean, really strongly encourage people to get the word out there. And if you're part of other civic groups, like I said, I have personally presented for, I think, Lions, Rotary, Kiwanis, Veterans Group, Senior Groups. I mean, if somebody has the ask, if I'm not available, we'll find staff to attend. And I know I speak for the choir here. We want to just keep getting the word out there, and we're going to do whatever it takes to keep spreading the word. And so be our eyes, be our ears. When in doubt, call us out. That's my 2 cents, and then
I would say, again, from the prevention perspective, at your league forums, ask the candidates what their positions are on some of these issues. Be really clear about where they stand on violence prevention, where they've stood on some legislation in the past, the Violence Against Women Act. Some of those kinds of things will give you insight as to, where they stand on those particular issues.
But don't be too easy, because who's going to say, no, we're for violence against women?
Dig. Dig a little. And see where, if money goes where the mouth is, so to speak. The other piece that I would just say again, and I'm coming from a very beginning of the continuum, is we have a program now that's called Green Dot that we're doing, which is about bystanders. And what we've found, whether it's in bullying, domestic violence, sexual violence, any kind of interpersonal violence, that the earlier you intervene, the more likely you are to head something off at the pass before it gets severe. Unfortunately, in our culture, we are very much, that's none of my business, that's a private matter. And we need to start moving away from there and becoming proactive bystanders. And we actually have, of course, we'll be doing it in the fall with Anoka Ramsey Community College, and really looking at what it means to be a proactive bystander, because there are really legitimate psychological phenomena that occur that keep you from becoming a bystander. And this course actually addresses that and helps you develop your own personal plan, so that when you're Captain Sully flying in the air and you don't know where you're going to put down this big 747, you've rehearsed it so many times that you have a plan. And so when that moment that makes you want to either fight, flight, or freeze comes, you know, whoa, I've got this plan and this is what I'm going to do. So becoming that proactive bystander is really an important part for each one of us to do.
You can always volunteer at Hope for Youth or help me at the school district. Actually, on Saturday, we have a huge fundraiser, the Rum River Music Fest, and it's a fundraiser for Hope for Youth. Come out and enjoy some great music. But there's not just ways that you can volunteer in the center. We're also looking for people on the committees. So getting involved in the fundraising committee, the housing committee that's moving forward with this hopefully overnight shelter. So there's a lot of really great ways to get involved with Hope for Youth. And then what I'm doing at the school district, we have our back to school events, and being visible and talking about homelessness, talking about trafficking, so people understand that it is in our community. A lot of people, oh, it doesn't happen here. We don't have homelessness in our community. Yes, we do. So the more that you can talk about the issue and give facts, give data is key.
The last thing I would just say too is we do have a sexual and domestic violence coalition of Anoka County that Becky and I are both members of that, and if anybody is interested in hearing what we do or would be interested in attending a meeting, we would appreciate any community involvement that we can get. Okay. You're on.
Thank you for coming, and thank everyone for your questions. It's been a very eye-opening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.